Theology Thursday 26. I think we're live. We are live. Theology Thursday 26. What I realized, or what we realized over the course of the last 2 weeks, I kind of get real amped up and excited to get in. So I stopped introducing who we are. So for people who don't know, I am Terrell Harris. This is my beautiful wife, Brooke Harris. And we are pastors of the Future Church Plant, the Open Box. We are both Wesley Seminary graduates. And we've decided, all right, so behind the scenes, we've been working. We will be having our first worship experience in September of next year. So we're about 10 months out, right? Well, I don't know. That's the math, 9, 10. Yeah, almost 10. 9.5, 10 months out. So that's who we are. One thing I want to give a shout out to us for continuing to do this. Like I say that to
shout out to us.
I say that to say oftentimes I don't take the time to celebrate.
Yeah.
But 26 weeks, we have 6 months of content as it relates to Theology Thursdays. Mm-hmm. So that's amazing. I didn't over the last couple of weeks. I wasn't sure what I was going to get out from being sick and then also having a little bit of writer's block. So the Lord blessed me and a message came trickling down. No, it didn't happen like that. I just kind of dug in and kept reading what I was reading. So, Theology Thursday 26. We were talking about leadership the week before last. And I wanted to continue that discussion. So, today's discussion is leadership, but being a servant. So, we're going to talk about servant leadership, what it means to be a servant leader versus being I don't want to say a regular leader, but there's a difference between leadership and servant leadership. And then we'll look at some scripture as we normally do. So the scripture references I have today are Mark 9 verses 33 through 37. And then we'll also look at Mark 10 verses 43 through 45. So Mark, actually, can you read this? I said it.
Mark 9, 33 through 37.
37, I'm sorry.
Okay. Then they came to Capernaum. And when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them,
Oh, yeah, I cut it right there. Kind of abrupt ending, but the next verse, I just decided to cut it there. So then we have Mark 10.
Hey, you're waiting.
I was thinking like, you're not finished, but I cut it there for a specific reason. But then we have Mark 10 verses 43 through 45, and I'll read that. But it is not so among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. So here you have Jesus talking about servant leadership. So just to give you a little bit of context, for those that don't know, Mark is the oldest of the 4 Gospels. I think some scholars believe it was written either in the 60s, 70s, or 80s in terms of, the historical context in which it was written. What you have to know about this particular text, I think oftentimes, when we look at the Mark 9 text and it talks about children, I've heard it mentioned that, we got to be like children, and they associate children with being joyful and all that stuff like that. So they give all the child attributes. So when I dug into the context as it relates to the story when it was happening, children were almost invisible this time. So when he's saying, you're going to be like the children or become like children, although children were happy and stuff like that, they were probably they were lower on the totem pole than slaves, right? So when we see, Jesus embracing somebody who basically in that context is a nobody until they're a certain age, this is what Jesus is telling them. So as a servant, you have to be ready to be like almost a nobody. So another thing, as it relates to the word servant. So the Greek word, maybe I'm mispronouncing this. My Greek is, I don't know. So we'll just go with the phonetic spelling or saying is diakonos. And I believe the word deacon comes from this. So that in the Greek actually means an attendant or a waiter. And it says one who, basically takes on menial duties. So when you see the word deacon in the New Testament, or you see the word servant, it's really somebody who just think about waiters, and actually think about how some of us may treat waiters or attendants at times, and the type of jobs that waiters have to do, whether it's bussing tables, cleaning dishes, and cleaning up after the mess of somebody else. Quick story before we get into the servant leadership part. I remember actually going out with certain individuals who would just be like, "Oh, that's the waiter's job," and they would dump tissues, and I just felt so weird because I'm like, just because the waiter has a job, oftentimes waiters and waitresses aren't paid that much. They rely on tips. Um, just to think that we're supposed to, like, I'm not gonna make their job harder, but this individual was fine. Like, forget that. I'm not the waitress. Let him and her handle it. So just think about when you hear the word servant. Just think about how bad certain attendant jobs are, including I've done dishes. Oh, that was the worst. So just keep that in mind as we go on with this discussion, right? So, oops, lost my place. So basically, that's what Jesus meant by the term servant. So the discussion I want to open up to it's just me and Brooke tonight is, what is the difference between servant leadership and traditional leadership? Do you have anything? What do you think?
I think oftentimes traditional leadership gets talked about when it comes to anybody in a managing position and higher. And so I think sometimes it can be looked at as the person who's running it or the person who is in charge. So then they are dictating something. You do this, you do that. Did you do it? Okay. You did it. Great. You didn't do it? Oh my gosh, can you hurry up and do it? Like that. And it's just kind of that all the time. And from what you were talking about from a servant leadership, from a servant leadership, it's making me think that it's more of a kind of like a behind the scenes, kind of letting other things go forward, but also being an example.
Just to catch you up, we're talking about servant leadership and the difference between servant leadership and traditional leadership. And the scripture reference we used was Mark verses out of Mark 9 and Mark 10, where Jesus talks about. First he tells the disciples, if you want to be first, basically you have to be last and be willing to serve. And then Jesus talks about also being coming to serve and not to be served. So that's the context. And then we set up, as it relates to the word servant, when we look at that term, the Greek meaning actually means attendant, or like a waiter or a waitress. So we're talking about, when you see that word servant or deacon, it's like really doing like menial duties and stuff like that. So we just got into the discussion about, or the question is, what is the difference between traditional leadership and servant leadership? Do you want to add anything else to that?
No, I will say that I like. Actually, yes, I do.
Okay.
I will say that I like looking at the child, not just as, not just as the child being innocent and what's the word? Like just innocent and happy and one who, listens all the time. But even in saying that the child is kind of invisible, it's kind of saying that even in their invisibility, they still matter.
Yeah.
So I want you to kind of be like them because they still have a purpose, but it's more behind the scenes. So smaller.
So to catch you up, we're talking about servant leadership, the difference between servant leadership and traditional leadership. And we use Mark 9 and Mark 10. And what's happening in Mark 9 is when Jesus sits the disciples down, he says, if you want to be great or whatever, you have to be a servant to all. And he takes the child and says you have to be like the child. So the context of that is children. What Brooke was saying was children in society, in that particular society, first century, were on the bottom of the totem pole, so they were invisible. So he was telling basically the disciples, you have to be willing to be like this, because actually being a servant leader is not going to be fun. And then we looked at Mark 10, where Jesus talks about coming to serve and not be served, and how the word servant in Greek actually means attendant and like waiter or waitress. So like when you hear deacon or servant, it's like real low duties and menial tasks. So that's that. All right. So I could pose the question to you all. What do you think the difference between servant leadership and traditional leadership is? any, if you have any comments.
Servant leadership and traditional leadership.
Yep. Or if you even think there's a difference.
You want to go first? No?
If you don't have anything, that's fine. We'll continue. Okay.
Servant leadership and traditional leadership. Traditional leadership kind of reminds me of like Barack. And I'm not saying like Barack Obama, excuse me. And I'm not saying, like he's not serving people.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I think of like traditional leadership. I mean, Adolf Hitler, not comparing him to Barack, but Obama. But he was, in fact, a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he was crazy out of his mind, he did lead thousands of people. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think of traditional leadership. Servant leadership, just serving people through, the grace of God and having people come together to help serve others, that are in need. That's mm-hmm. what I think of when I think of servant leadership. That, group of people either has a need or a want that mm-hmm. you could possibly fulfill.
Yep.
So
I guess when I think of servant leadership, I think about mothers going out and from the slums of Calcutta, like trying to, just help one person at a time. Traditional leadership, gosh, there's so many examples of that. I mean, you just think of your traditional, like, hierarchical organization, and there's somebody at the top, and sometimes those somebodies expect you to be their servants. So,
yeah. Sometimes. Yeah. Did you say sometimes? I thought it's all the time.
Right.
Right. All the time?
So, it's sort of a flip on the whole concept of, the first being last and the last being first. It's like, no, the first are going to be first, and the last are going to be last.
Right. Yeah. So, the interesting thing about this, right? So we talk about servant leadership, but politicians are, not politics, but politicians, people who serve in Congress, the president, mayors, and all that stuff like that. For some odd reason, they're considered servant leaders. I don't know why.
They're supposed to be doing it for the people.
Yeah, I get it, but
it's doing it for the people who pay them.
Exactly. Thank you. Because I was trying to figure out a way to put that in there, but yeah. So they get paid. They get paid well. They get pension. They get all these benefits. So ultimately, I mean, I guess they're serving the people, but they have.
But I mean, that's not even the issue. But I think what you're saying is that they're, in addition to that, they're getting extra stuff put in their pockets or put in when they want to run again and all that. It's that extra stuff. But that's just a typical salary and benefits.
Yeah.
So yeah, they should get that.
So I'm gonna read a quote from a paper entitled "What is Servant Leadership?" It's by Robert Greenleaf, and then we can compare public servants or servant leaders to what he's saying about this, right? So he says the difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test and difficult to administer is, and he lists out the following: do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect of the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? And then finally, he says, a servant leader focuses primarily on the growth and well-being of people and the communities to which they belong, while traditional leadership generally is the accumulation and exercises of power by one at the top of the pyramid. Servant leadership is different. The servant leader shares power, puts the needs of others first, and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So, are public servants, these people in positions of power, let's just say, like, let's pick on Donald Trump. Actually, we don't even have to pick on Donald Trump. like, so it's when I read this, I was like, man, like, how many people actually fit into this mold of actually being served? Because I can't recall any politician really wanting to or making it seem like it's important that the communities that they're benefiting that they really grow.
Not true.
I think a lot of them start that
Yep.
way. I think even Barack Obama started that way about his work in the South Side of Chicago, but something happens on the way to the White House and on the way to Washington. I don't know what it is for a lot of them. I can't speak for all because I don't know all my congressmen, senators, whatever. But yeah, I think it's unfortunate, like what you're saying, that we have so many examples of traditional leadership and not enough of.
Yeah, I think a lot of politicians start out talking like that, especially they'll talk like that when they want to get elected.
No, but it's one thing to talk like that. It's a total different thing to actually carry that out.
Right, and I think some of them might want to, but I think you're right. We don't know what that road looks like because that road can be filled with pressure, power, money, like all sorts of things that can influence them for the good or for the bad. And so I think it's not very cut and dry, but they're not the only ones though.
No. I mean, I don't think. Well, actually, let's see. Let's see how we want to. So this is a good leading point. So why aren't people servant leaders, or what is the risk in becoming a servant leader? Like, so you say you don't know what happens. So why aren't people diving headfirst into servant leadership?
But if you just said that servant leadership is about focusing on the other, and if you go back to the scripture which talks about Jesus saying, "Be like a child," and a child is invisible. That's not really the type of society that we live in, because being invisible is not what people want. People want, or some people do. Actually, you have many millionaires and billionaires who are kind of invisible in a sense, but a lot of people, they want to be seen. They want to find tangible and visible ways to know that they have power, that they matter, that whatever. So
all feeding the ego.
Correct. Yeah, but I think that's why I was like, I don't know if you should kind of just hone in on politicians, because that happens in ministry, that happens in community organizations, like it happens all over the place where many people talk good, but then once things start happening, and like I said, it could be ego, it could be money, or it could be like pressure because you have these high hopes of like, yes, I'm going to do this. I'm going to think about, what's his name? Dwight Howard.
I remember
like when
Dwight
he
Howard
came out early on in the NBA, he was like
gonna
18.
He was going to put the cross on the NBA uniform.
He was very like Christian or whatever, and then after a while you did not hear that anymore from him.
They shut that down.
And then you start hearing about him having different baby mamas, which is not like to judge him, but just to say that shift, like something happens. Like even when like people will try to squash that
it's hard to be a servant leader.
Well, I don't really understand the question. What's the question? Ask the question again.
Why aren't people servant leaders?
I know a lot of people that are servant leaders.
Okay.
And why? I mean, I've actually met a lot of, people that are millionaires that are servant leaders. And I don't think necessarily just because, you get rich or famous doesn't stop you from being a servant leader.
Right.
So there are people, think about it, especially if you're coming from a point of view from a millionaire, they have to serve others in some type of way. You know what
millionaire? What type of millionaire?
If you think, like for an example, one of the millionaires that I know, he has trained thousands of people in order to, make them or help them be prosperous in their business. Yeah. And a lot of people pay him to do that. Right. And he helps out thousands of people, and across, not in advance, but, it comes back and forth. So what I'm just simply trying to say is that, just because, they make a lot of millionaires make a lot of money or something like that, or public idols, doesn't mean, they're not serving a lot of people.
Right. But for the ones who aren't, day
Yeah.
servant leader.
Like, what
I
would be
think that-
what would be the challenge in becoming a servant leader,
right?
if any? I mean, you might not see it as a challenge because that might be your natural mode. For some people, it's natural, but they don't look
Right.
at servant leadership. They look at leadership in terms of me being at the top of the organization. I'm at the top of the pyramid. I'm the king or the queen, and I'm just gonna bark down orders, and you're gonna help me go to where I have to go.
I see it like two challenges. One, having people look to you for help can feel really good. It's a very seductive thing because and people who struggle with codependency sometimes are surprised, when people ask them to get down off their horse and start rescuing people, they don't realize how addicted they are to being the rescuer or being the helper or even being the servant, And so some people, I feel like having a lot of people depend on you or having people even look to you, not even look up to you, but just to look to you, that amount of power can feel really good to people. I've also seen the flip side of it where people try to engage in servant leadership and they realize that their help isn't helping. And they get so downhearted and frustrated that they just stop trying, or they bump into people, they bump into that traditional leadership model, and they get frustrated because they feel like, I can't get through this person's ego to really do the good that I want to do. And it's like, if I can't beat them, then I'll just join them. So I don't know. I see both.
Yeah, no, I think you raised some excellent points. In looking at, becoming a servant leader, especially as, the stuff with the open box kind of unravels, I realized I have to check my ego at the door too, because even like when we go out and serve and people feel kind of privileged in terms of us helping them, and then them having some people being grateful, of course, and then some people having bad attitudes and kind of looking down upon us like, why aren't you providing us with higher quality items? That's a challenge in the sense that, like, so we say that you, as a servant, you were like low and we're invisible, and that's exactly how we get treated sometimes. Like, oh, who are you? Like, we like to think that we take our time and our effort and our funds and we raise money and stuff like that, and we go out there and then somebody's going to be extremely rude to us. That's exactly what happens in servant leadership, which is going to turn some people off. So, along with that, you mentioned, there's potential burnout. There's a ton of reasons people want to be involved. Some people might even see servant leadership not as practical as it relates to financial situations. So how can I serve a community and care for my family financially or my household financially? Because at times it doesn't seem like it's beneficial to do it.
Yeah. So the question that you had was, what are some of the challenges?
Yeah.
What was the question? Can you repeat the question again? I just want to make sure it's clear.
So the initial question was, what's the risk, or why aren't people becoming servant leaders?
Oh.
So risk, challenges, or what would prevent somebody from stepping into this role?
Or people that have already been into that role, or preventing people from stepping into becoming servants? Or are we taking it from people that are already servants?
No, just people from stepping into it. So, say for instance, somebody looking at, well, whether or not I'm actually going to serve the community this way, versus like, no, I'm just going to take a step back and not be involved. So case in point, like, I'm part of a homeowners organization, and there's only a small percentage of the community that comes out to the meetings. So, and for the people that get involved and volunteer their time, it's even a smaller percentage. So what's preventing the other people who even just come to say, you know what, I'm going to volunteer and help out and serve the community? I can answer that from experience. It's not fun to be in the seat of a servant leader because people throw rocks at the servant leader, right? So when I was president of the board or on the board, what happens is when things don't go right, everybody blames you. And to be in a position that's already low, that's already underappreciated, why would somebody sitting in the audience, seeing how the community or the world treats these servant leaders, be involved in servant leadership? There's no reason for me to get it. If you're gonna treat servant leaders like that and they're helping, why would I want to do that? Look how they treated Jesus. All Jesus did was bless people. He blessed people, he healed people, he spoke life into people, he saved people, and he got hung on a cross. And this is just for helping. I mean, granted, there was this whole theology behind him saying whether or not he was God or not. But if they take a step back to look at the big picture, all he was doing was really helping. Yeah. So why would people want to help?
Yeah.
But despite that, despite all of that, servant leadership is extremely important, right? So I have a few points.
Yes, please bring us up forward.
yeah, we're gonna raise the mood.
I was reconsidering some
things.
Right?
No. Okay, so the reason you should be servant leaders or consider servant leadership is not to even say that it has to be a full-time thing, but the reason you should look from a place of service as opposed to a place of being at the top of the pyramid is when we serve our families and we serve our communities, ultimately the communities will thrive. So when we take, even if it's in your household, even if it's in your cul-de-sac or whatever, so there's an individual who runs this Asian gentleman, I think his name is Mr. Phillip, in our community. Whenever he runs, he picks up like garbage. He just picks up trash. Nobody's asking him to do this, but he does it all the time. And despite him actually helping out, with the board and stuff like that, he'll still do it, and ultimately it benefits the community. So it doesn't even have to be big tasks, because guess what happens when people see him picking up trash? It influences somebody to do something else, because I remember them mentioning, like, wait a minute, are you the guy that runs? And people are like, yes. And then in the group, they're like, oh, he picks up trash. And then it influences the community to be like, you know what, maybe I shouldn't litter, or maybe I should help pick up trash too. So despite, individuals in the community being angry at the board, you can't be angry at the fact that this individual is actually helping clean the community. Another reason servant leadership is important is a servant leader listens to the voice of their community and society, and then they move the society or community towards serving those in needs, even if the risk is involved. So that's something I already said based on the last story. But the servant leader, the reason we need servant leaders is because at times we as individuals can be so focused on what we have going on. But when you have somebody in a role of service, they could actually see gaps in the community and influence the community to get where it's going, whether it's crime associated, whether it's trying to educate the community on financial situations, whether it's building relationships. So ultimately, if we don't have anybody filling these positions, like, the community kind of dies out or it fizzles out. So I think basically what it is, I think we're all blessed with a particular skill set. At a certain point, we have to realize or figure, how can I use this skill set or this talent that I've been blessed with, not to just benefit me, but also to service the individuals around me? Because when we serve the individuals around us, it puts people in the position to, in the future, serve, but it also puts people in the position to become their better selves. Does that make sense? And then, let's see. Here's another point. In short, the enemy of servant leadership basically is strong natural servants who have the potential to lead but do not lead, or who choose to follow a non-servant. They suffer, society suffers, and so it may be in the future. So basically what this quote is saying is, when people know they're servant leaders or they have the desire to serve, then they just kind of step back. Ultimately, society suffers. But even more important with this is, when you choose to follow somebody that's a non-servant and you know that this individual is jacking up the community, that makes it a little bit worse. And basically, you ultimately become the enemy of the community. So you kind of have to take a step back. You don't agree with that? Kind of made a face.
I did make a face. I made a face because when we talked about servant leadership versus traditional leadership, a lot of people are working in jobs under traditional leadership. So when you look at a quote like that says, it's kind of like, you become like an enemy to servant leadership. It's kind of almost like you become part of the problem. That's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's true, but that just was kind of heavy, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is heavy because that would not, I'm not, by all means, I'm not saying leave your job.
No, I get that. I get that.
But at certain points, I think even we have to assess some of the things that we do in the context of our jobs. I remember one individual I worked with being uncomfortable with the type of work we did. She said she wasn't going to be able to do it for long because it was military stuff. And her background as a Christian was like, I don't know if I could actually do this for a long period of time. So not to say that, she just up and left, but she knew that ultimately she may have to find her way out and service the community. So even with me, with some of the jobs I've had, I realized over the course of the context of like the last 4 to 5 years that I would be more beneficial in a position of service as opposed to just sitting at a desk banging on a computer to fix a website that's not going to impact my particular community. Or the website's not really impacting anything in terms of actually helping people. So it's interesting, to get into this topic and figure out what servant leadership actually is and looks like, because it's unraveling for me to where I'm like, I don't even think I could. It's going to be challenging for me to accept any positions that don't service a community in any particular way.
Yeah, but I think when you say that, I don't think it's always, an organization or company could say that they service the community in some way, and you could still be under leadership that is traditional leadership.
True.
So I could work for like a nonprofit that builds wells in Africa, but it doesn't mean that the CEO or the executive director isn't a bureaucratic kind of, workhorse.
Well, it reminds me of David and Saul.
Yeah.
David, he was the man after God's own heart. He was the one that God, raised up eventually. But for so many years, Saul was in charge and Saul was losing his mind. So it was really hard. And, as I've listened to that quote, because it was challenging for me too. And I just find myself, hoping that there is a way for individuals who find themselves in that position to model servant leadership, even though the person that they might be underneath, could care less. And maybe they could start a movement, not a coup, ain't trying to take over, not trying to usurp the authority that God has put on the person who's in charge, but continue to live out a Christ-like example until there's a way for them to either move on or until God raises them up in another capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if you look at it like that, then you have to really take stock and be aware of the role that you're playing in your life and how that plays out in your community, in your job, in your whatever. And if you really start looking at some of that stuff, like you can't really, you can't be blind anymore. Like
it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. You can't shut it off. It's like the Matrix.
A lot of discernment, in choosing your job, choosing who you want to follow and things like that. And I wonder if that quote is really speaking to that and calling all of us to a higher level of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And who we choose to follow. Maybe that's also part of it.
The interesting thing about all of this as we go through this is, so I can sit here and say be a servant leader, but servant leadership is only going to be a small part of society anyway, right? So as we sit and discuss and kind of wrestle and see how challenging it is, some people will be like, no way. Other people are going to be like, you know what? I understand where you're coming from, and maybe there are ways for me to help out in my context and in my community. Maybe there's something I can do to just influence the individual next to me, whether it's um, doing, some sort of helping kids with homework after school, mentorship programs. It could be anything. And, and I'll close out here. The one thing about servant leadership, no one's saying that we actually have to take on the role of Christ. Christ had his own cross to carry. We have our own cross to carry. And the burden is not even going to be that. It's not supposed to be that difficult. What I want to point out here is if you decide to be in servant leadership and if you are in servant leadership, what you have to stay away from, like you mentioned, is the Jesus complex of trying to fix and save everything. So you have to know your role and then understand that even when things seem challenging, when they seem tough, remember that even a little bit of influence, the seeds that you throw out, they'll germinate some other place. You might not even see it come to fruition, but the change could be extremely powerful.
Yeah.
It could be extremely big. So I would encourage people to look at this. Also, as it relates to leaders that you're following, you could look at, some of the stuff that we went through today. You could look at Theology Thursday 25, and then you can figure out, like, all right, is this person a servant leader, or are they just really just talking like they're a servant leader? So look at the characteristics of a leader. We did that at Theology Thursday 25. You could replay back this discussion on servant leadership and just be encouraged. Like anything you do to help your community, whether it's an hour, whether it's 30 minutes, whether it's 5 minutes, will have a great impact. And, ultimately will help the situation that's, currently the way the situation currently is now.
And it's a learning process.
Exactly. So that is it. Peace and blessings. This is the last Theology Thursday of the year. Yep, because next week is Christmas Eve. The following week is New Year's Eve. I may put out little messages, but we won't meet. So we'll meet in the new year. And like I said, it's been an exciting year. 26 under the belt. That's 6 months of content. I'm excited and amazed at the same time, thinking about we actually did this for 6 whole months. It's a lot of stuff. I actually starting to forget some of the old ones, but thank you for watching. You can join our email list, theopenbox.com. I'm at Mr. Terrell Harris on everything. Brooke is at Landa Brooke on everything. Remember, we'll be having our first worship experience next September 2016. If you're interested in helping us out, you can email us at info@theopenbox.com, and that is it. Peace and blessings. Have a good one. If I can stop let's stop the recording.